So, can you hear me in the back? Okay, yeah. Okay, so, let's see, present. Okay, so now we just talk about RAG, which is what is more or less happening now in AI. There's so much value in this that almost all the people are doing RAG nowadays. But now I want to turn into what I think will happen in the future and how we might get there. So what's the main point of this talk? The main point of this talk is that I believe the primary users of software in the future is going to be AI, not us anymore, not Python developers anymore, it's going to be AI, right? So let's do a recap first and see how we might get there and what. I divided the progress in LLM roughly into three categories. Obviously they are not perfectly clear cut, but I think it's useful as a framework for thinking about this. The first one could be question answering box. These ones are ChatGPT. How many of you use ChatGPT? Daily? Okay, pretty good. Perplexity, any of you? Okay, 11, pretty good. So, what's important about this category? The important thing is you make questions and you get answers. This normally is text, but now we have some multimodal stuff, so you can go a bit closely, but the main point is that text in, text out. What are the limitations of this and why we might want to move on? The limitations of this is that if you code with ChatGPT, you go to ChatGPT, you make a question, you copy the text, you go to your editor, you try it out, it fails, you go back to ChatGPT, you try it again. How many of you have been doing this at some point? Maybe not now, but at some point, right? So this is one of the limitations. And the other limitation is that it's only text. Now there's images, yes, but I mean it's information out. There's nothing happening beyond giving you information to add. So, for those of you who have not seen ChatGPT, which probably is almost no one, let's see. Can you write a demo showing the status of some random GitHub repositories? So you do this, then you wait for a bit, depending on the model, you wait a bit more, you wait a bit less. Token, let's see.
So, you make some filming.
Huh?
Some filming.
Yeah, wait. I will, because I will copy it in the editor so you can see. So I copy the code, for example, you copy here, and too much. You have some code, actually code is not important. I just ask to list the stars in some GitHub repositories, right? And you will go here, Python demo 33, train. Okay, you have an error because what happened here? There's a token that is not here. It's got some public repositories, so you iterate, you go back, ask to fix it, and go back here. So, what's the next category? How can we do better? Copilots. How many of you use Copilot? Okay, cursor? Okay, so Copilot solve the friction problem. When you have to use ChatGPT for writing, code, or normal text, you have to context switch a lot. And Copilots try to fix this. What they do is instead of having to go to ChatGPT, you put ChatGPT inside your tool, so that it doesn't disrupt your flow. You can just use it in the tool that you're using. The advantage of this is that you don't have to context switch, and it also enables some stuff like RAG, which can now leverage your code base or some other stuff. For example, Gamma, I was trying for this slide, is to ChatGPT for slides. You just ask, I copy-paste the article I wrote, and then it generates some slides. You have to fine-tune them, but it works. So, what is the problem to this? Now this is limited to a single application, right? Like this is only for coding or only for slides. For example, what I wanted to do is I have some code demo and I have some slides, so I would like to make the slides taking into account the code, right? But then I cannot do that because I need to use Microsoft Copilot and then I have to come up for the slides so they don't talk to each other, right? The demo here would be, let's try to fix this. I only want public repositories, you don't need authenticated. Okay. No, don't worry, it happens commonly, but then they use some other code. Okay, and here you have some basic actions, very basic actions. You can apply, you have not used cursor instead of copilot, I suggest it because it's very similar, but it has very nice bindings and very good stuff, like this. You can see the changes it's proposing. So now you're not using headers, but so I thought it like just following repositories, you accept the changes, and let's see. Right? And now you do this. And you would do this with whatever changes you want, and you don't have to go into ChatGPT anymore. You have everything in the editor that you use. So what's next? The next step, we said, now we put ChatGPT inside the tool. The next thing that we would like is, I don't want to talk to ChatGPT inside each of my tools. I want to talk to ChatGPT only. When I say ChatGPT, I mean any LLM, right? I'm not paying my OpenAI. So you can use Llama also, not in Europe. Anyway, so you would like to have a single LLM that you talk, and this LLM talks to your tools. I want to do a presentation about this, so I ask, hey, can you do a presentation based on this blog post, modify these slides, taking into account this code, don't invent it, right? Put snippets from this code. This would be amazing. In this category, there's not many people, right? There's some people well positioned, like Zapier. How many of you know what Zapier is? Okay, for those of one who you don't know, Zapier is, before LLMs, it's just a software that allows you to connect different services, right? You can say, like, if someone goes to my website to get a notification in Slack, it allows you to connect some boxes to create some workflows. And of course, they are very well positioned because now these connect the boxes can be an LLM that can be more clever. Like, oh, is the customer very angry? Yes, then, you know, send them to some representative. Otherwise, just ignore them. But still, what is the main limitation of this? The tools here need to be defined on setup, right? So, what do I mean by this? Zapier, for example, integrates Slack or any messaging tool. And if I want to use another one, if they have not this integration, you will not be able to use it, right? And then you are vendor locked in, and you have some limitations. So, okay, now we will come to questions, but recap: limitations, text-based, context switching, copilots, single applications, and in the end, we have a single integrated LLM, but we don't have all the integration we would like. They are limited. So what's the next step? The next step is, what if instead of getting text, we saw that some of them make some actions, but in general it's answers. What if we could act, right? I don't want ChatGPT, Cursor, or Copilot to tell me, like, here is the code to retrieve the stars of these repositories. I just want to get the stars. And in this example, to prevent the authentication problem that in the end I had anyway, I could be doing a demo that push this code or create the tag in this new repository. And this is an action. It's not just getting information. It's ChatGPT or the LLM is doing stuff for them. So what if they could perform action directly in general? How could we do that? First, we can take a step back and see what are actions. What are actions in software? So, as you all know, software actions are text command, right? In one way or another, it ends up in numbers, yes, I know, but at some point they are text, right? So they are functions, they are methods, they are calls, so they are text. Inputs and outputs, also text. They are parameters, they are JSON, they are HTML. Both inputs and outputs are, again, structured text. And the LLMs are very good at generating and understanding text. The most famous thing now is that they understand natural language, right? Because it's the thing that never happened before. But they are very good at understanding code to when generating. It's a software. And in addition to that, we can have software actions over them, right? So how do we do that? So, HTTP, how many of you know what HTTP is? Okay. Essentially, for those of you who don't know, HTTP is how you communicate with the internet using text. You want to go to X, to my X or Twitter, whatever you want, you have this information saying, I want to go to this web page, to this path, and I want to receive HTML, a web page. You can also do this in the command line, for example, with curve, so you see even more clearly, because when you go to a web page, you see a UI, so you might think like, oh, these are buttons, right? This is not text. So if you just copy this command in the command line, then you will see that I do this, and I get HTML back, right? basic JavaScript to be loaded and stuff, but you see, I make an action, I get text in return. So, normally when we use the internet, we use website, right? We interact with buttons, we click stuff, we fill in forms, but under the hood it uses text as we just saw. So, many times for LLMs or before that, for coding in general, you don't want to be clicking buttons, you want to send just the text. And how does this happen? This is API definitions, which essentially are, do people know what I'm talking about? Yes, no, it should not be. So API definitions, you get the descriptions of some paths, which parameters you have to use, and which responses you might get. For example, this is from one of our APIs, you can search for gateways, it says like if you search for gateways, you will get this description, quite obvious, the parameters you can get, this is the correct response, and these are some errors. So this, see, you can copy gateway search, and go to here, and you'll see instead of getting HTML, this is a JSON endpoint, so you can see exactly one of these, each of these gateways is exactly as this example. Normally here you have a more complicated notation, so this is not standard notation, but I think it's easier to understand as well. So, how do we connect this? LLMs can interpret user request, text, we just saw prompts. They can generate Python code, we just saw it, just exactly an HTTP code to GitHub. And they can interact with software via this API, they can make the request. So now I'm going to show you a small proof of concept. So, when we did this as, we got together with Jordi in January or February, and no one was doing these kind of things because I think there's so much value, right, that people were not trying this. But we did these 12 APIs, which we said like, look, if I have the text description of a server, the LLM doesn't need anything else to call this server because it knows how to call, how to make a HTTP request. We just saw with the RAG that you can just copy-paste the definition, right? That you get a big file like this, you put it in the prompt, and then after the prompt you say like, hey, call one of these endpoints. And the LLM will choose one of these endpoints, write the Python code, and then you execute it. And this was the small proof of concept that we did. So here I try again. So this is very easy, right? Like you have a prompt, you ask, give me a list of public repositories, we're not going to use that, very similar to what we already did. Then you ask this to the LLM, and then after a while, depending on the model, it's going to be faster or slower, it's going to work or not, you never know. At the LLM magic, you get some code, and then you can run it. This obviously doesn't run in the browser, but you can actually run it in the browser, but it's not safe. Then you get the list of repositories. This is just a showcase, right? What I would like again is, I say this, and I know nothing about this, right? That way, now here, we are all Python developers, so we know about this, and it's cool, and we like to code, right? But eventually, people that don't know how to code, you want them to do this and get this. Maybe not GitHub, because they do not like to use GitHub, but you get the point. This is just to show how it's happening. If there's some errors, you can edit it, and you can play around. It's not perfect, it has issues, and you have to deal with the right thing that, oh, this API is too big, and probably like that. In this case, we just have a list of services here, because we didn't implement more, but this, the only thing that's happened here is you get the API definition, JSON file, you copy it, and then the LLM can just read this. And the very important thing here is that before we had a predefined amount of tasks in Zapier, right? You need to know them beforehand. This is like, let's say, setup time or coding time. In this case, what's happening, which is what very little people are doing, is inference time, right? These are not coding in advance. I can add my API, my private API, I can just put the file and ask it directly. I don't need to code anything else because it already knows how to read this kind of files at inference time, which I think is the valuable thing here. So, like very briefly, you can see it from the back. Anyway, very similar to what he said. The code of this is a bit longer, but long story short, you just load an API spec file, you have a prompt, a system prompt, in this case you are a Python programmer, generate Python code to fulfill the user request using this API spec. the same thing we just saw you run. And then you pass in the user request. The user request retrieve the list of repositories. And here what you would do is you generate Python code, and then you would execute, get the result, and send the code back to the UI to be executed or do whatever you want. These, don't try to run this, it doesn't run, it's just like more or less, the exec doesn't get the results, but it's the overall, it's how it works under the hood more or less. So what's next? The future is now. This is a bit of a perspective slide, let's say. Because since we wrote this in January, this is what happened in LLMs. The cost has gone almost 240 times, right? Like, yes, maybe it's not a scalable model, it's blah, 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 blah. Yeah, the point is the cost is going extremely fast down, which never happens in technology this fast, right? NVIDIA doesn't get cheap this fast, right? It gets, the stock market goes up, not the prices. So, performance, this is a mathematical evaluation for LLMs, and they were doing about 25% math code, so they were very bad, and now I'm not even updated, right? This is Gemini Ultra, I don't know where it was, but it doesn't have 01, which was last week. I think this evaluation is already obsolete because most of them already perform 100, and they have to create new ones, right? This is going very fast, right? Like very fast. About speed, okay, I didn't find the image, but I actually thought that I can show you Cerebras. Have any of you heard about Grok with Q or Cerebras?
Yes. No, Grok is Cerebras.
So Cerebras is the toolkit that now is faster than Grok, right? So you can see how extremely fast this is. For example, write the longest possible text that you can, include Python, random stuff, or Java. So, see, you don't even have time to scroll.
Does it show tokens per second?
Yeah, it does. Almost 2,000. So, it's pretty fast. And the point about this is like, how many changes did we have to do to leverage all of these improvements? Mostly, this is it, right? Of course, there are some other changes, right? This is already fantastic, but you just have to use the numerous model because they are the same, like suddenly magic. The point I'm trying to convey here is that if you are playing with LLMs and you have an application that you think is more or less good, right? It's not perfect. When we did this talk to APIs, we get confused, or now it's not parameters, or not add the authentication, but 6 months after it's perfect, right? So if you are doing now, if you try out LLMs and it does something that is not amazing, but kind of good, you know, it's not stumbling too much, then you can be sure that in 6 months, 1 year, very, very short time, it's gonna work. So just code your app, and it's not working yet, just wait for it. It's too expensive. When we were doing talk to APIs, I think it was 50 cents each request, now it's cents, right? So, and well, so now Replit, does anyone know about Replit? And Replit agent, have you tried? Okay, so the Replit agent is the latest in generations, right? It actually does what I was expecting. It can generate code, it can run the code, it can see if it needs to install things, it can do many more things, right? So let's do generate an application that gets on GitHub stars and plugs them in a nice HTML web page. And plugs, okay. Now you tell them, okay, I want to do this thing. You can do it any app you want. Replit, the good thing about Replit, for those of you who don't know, which is apparently all of you, let me show very quickly a normal project. So let's see. So Replit is like a Microsoft Copilot, like it's a development environment with the advantage that it's online, and then they provide you with services, right? Here you can already add a PostgreSQL to your app. Imagine that Copilot has already PostgreSQL integrated. It has also object storage. It has many services like AWS already integrated. And when you click run, which would be with Python main.py, the link you get is already online and live. So it's very easy to deploy, like perfect platform for hackathons. Everything runs very, very fast. And now let's go back to the agent. So see, I have this thing, says I'm going to create a plan for this application. I'm gonna do what I told you, and then build the initial prototype. It already tries to be proactive and say, do you want also to input which repository you want? Do you want deploy pagination, stuff like that? In my opinion, it's better to start simple, and then keep adding features. And now we will just do that, right? Now it's just simple ones. It creates here the files, add.py, templates, DJS. You can see here the progress. Now it's going to install dependencies. See? Poetry is the P new clip, let's say. Or it installs, it tells you as well, I failed to install this, I'm going to try to install something else. And now I'm going to say, hey, I'm running this, does it look okay? Because it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a screenshot to have a look. But normally it's like, hey, is this what you wanted? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. You can walk away and go back later. So now it's going to run.
Why is it using Flask and not another framework?
Because if you don't specify, it will use whatever it thinks is best. Normally we propose, I can perfectly say, use another framework. Obviously, the more complex the framework it is, the more it will struggle. But, yeah. So now it's like, yeah, I'm running this. How does it look? You can tell it, like, I want to use this specific technology, use this other one, right? So I want it a list, no, that's
It's a script character.
few stats. Right? So it works. We just created, and every time I try, it does something slightly different. One time it listed a different amount of repositories, sometimes it puts a star, sometimes it does icons. Now you can tell it, so is the Flask application running and accessible? Can you see the GitHub stars? Yeah, pretty good. Now you can tell it, no, it's very bad, I wanted a list, I don't want to input anything. Make a presentation, don't want to run. But the work is done. And that's pretty much it. So, some implications. We just said, we can see that LLMs can become the primary actors in software. In Replit, in 1 year, I don't think you will even have to check the code. Now, normally, 5, 6 steps, you will stumble, you log, maybe you start, but this is a better, right? It's like saying when we had ChatGPT 2, oh, this is not really going to cut it. Or ChatGPT 3.5, yes, but I asked this problem, how do you cross the code and these things, and it didn't manage to do it, right? But yeah. So, shift towards making software LLM friendly. This is something that I find, for example, documentation, this cool OpenAPI specs or Swagger, I don't know, that have a lot of color and things, very annoying, because what I want is to copy this into the LLM, right? So I want things that are easy to use with LLMs. And I think this is going to become more and more common as you use software tools. Unfortunately, maybe some new frameworks are better than other ones, but if the LLM already knows about the old one, you know, and I want to do something small, I will probably not use the new one, I will just go with it. Or if the style that it's using I don't love it, probably I will go with it. And I think this is going to become more and more common. Yeah. So I would say that it's gonna get way, way better, but I think this is a bit what is going to happen, because this is in 2 years, right? Like in 2 years it's really going up. And some from OpenAI, they just released this O1 model that can multi-step reasoning, so it's a shift in parameters. Like, yeah, we have work for the upcoming year, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm going to plateau. When I was looking for the plots for this, I was like, LLM superlinear returns, and I had this ready link, like, oh, they're already hitting diminishing returns. Oh, this is not going to work. Okay, yeah, whatever. Then 2 months later, we had the Replit agent, we had this O1 implementation. So I think it's going to get way, way better. And I think that it's not something you can skip. And that's pretty much it. I think, is it late for questions? We can talk. It's 8. Maybe we can just have the pizza and have questions.
Pizza's not here yet. You have time for questions.
I was trying to go, it's the hard work, right? We prefer to like, for agents, right?
Yeah, you can create your agent architecture in Python.
So I tried Creo AI, and I found that I am not working full time on creating agents, but for me, I think it's the level of abstraction is a bit too high. There's too many boilerplate. It's supposed to be simplified, but when you try to do it for cool demos and new things, again, I'm not an expert, it's good, but for me that I'm trying to see what's happening or building tools, it's more useful to be a bit more low level. I found this in more people, like with launching, and it's very good, but some people are like, okay, when I really got into, let's say, production, there's so many things that I don't know about, and then I ended up going back to just calling OpenAI myself. So I have mixed feelings on this regard.
As I'm working with confidential documentation, I can go to these online settings, so
Yeah.
I'm trying it out again, and it's working pretty good.
Okay.
I was able to work with Katia.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Katia and AutoCAD.
Okay, yeah.
So this 3D.
I know, okay.
So I started building things, so it's
Okay.
doing nice things.
That's good. So,
What's your opinion about adding tools to LLMs, for instance, OpenAI, that you add tools like cassettes and you can do a lot of interaction, like we were talking about.
so sorry, and me adding the tools, or what do you mean? Can you repeat?
There's in OpenAI,
Yeah.
you can add tools,
Yeah.
for instance with LangChain or whatever, and you can like create your code, your Python code. So the LLM can call all these tools you add to it and give much better responses or do automation like
Yeah.
was
So you're telling me you're not asking, no?
well,
It's a question, or you're
if it's another way.
What
No.
do you think, the question started with, what do you think about adding, all these tools to things like
So like, just for context, OpenAI and Anthropic, all of them have different function calling methods or tool use that you can pass a list of tools. This is also, it's good and bad in some regard. In one side it's good because it's very convenient to call them. In Anthropic it's more convenient than OpenAI, but it's still a fixed list of tools because many times like, I was doing this Llama Index course and the tool was like, read this one PDF. I was like, if I want to read two PDF, like, no, you have two tools. One called this PDF and the other one called this PDF. And we were talking about this with them in their headquarters, and it was not great. In ChatGPT, the good thing is that you can have a function that is called Python, generate Python code, right? And then this is what people do. Like, when we talked to APIs, there was no function tooling, so we just hard coded. But now, what we, with some other tests, you can tell it like, use this function to just run code. So the LLM will generate code, and then it can call these tools to get the output from the code. Is it clear? But the latest, I saw a very recently about, it's a benchmark about how good agents are calling different tools in succession, especially designed to find whether the LLM is trying to understand what's happening on the other side, not just generating stuff. It can actually call like, what is a read API, let's say. And this leaderboard, there were like both versions, with function calling, like native function calling, and just prompt based, like without this. And the difference was not great. I mean, the first one were with function tools, but the second one with prompt was not so different, which, in my opinion, hints that probably when they get better and better, the scaffolding or like, oh, now I'm telling you how you can run Python code, but at some point it's going to be, they will already know how to do that. And all of these scaffolding is not going to be needed, or maybe yes, but it feels like they are going to progress faster.
Yeah, I probably have 8, 9 questions, but I will try to
Choose one.
So it was a very impressive example of what you did there with the stars and GitHub. If I have to program this myself, I will probably need a couple of hours because I first have to read the documentation, and then I will have some bugs and then some iterations, and this in a few seconds. It's very impressive. But I still have the feeling that this is a relatively easy task, right? And the software developers normally work with is much bigger, much more complex. And the question is, I mean, and it's really a genuine question. I mean, how scalable is this? I mean, you say we need 2 years, but I would say we need 2 years to double the size. And to really get to the complexity, probably most of the people here in the audience are working with every day, it might need 20 years.
Yeah. 20 years, I would not, I don't know. I would not say that. And I don't know how long it's going to take, right? What I know is like when we did this in January or in October, it could code, but it was like, meh. You know, it codes, but it gets many things wrong. The autocomplete is kind of cool. Now if you use cursor, sometimes you put the cursor and it completes like 2 paragraphs of exactly the code I wanted, right? I'm doing Golang code sometimes, and it's a clear API, right? There's not much complexity in terms of get data from the database, return the database. I put the name of the function, sometimes even that, and it auto-completes all. So it's not going to be suddenly it does everything. But I think the speed at which it's moving is great. Like for example, like when I use this like rapidly, because this is a very, let's say, stupid example, but this one, I was genuinely interested in which, oh, by the way, I didn't tell you this, but here, when it creates this is already live, so you don't have to even deploy it. You can just share this, right? You have to deploy nothing. It's just, Rapid is not telling me, so I did very good. And this one, for example, is already deployed. And I did this because I was interested in knowing how good, like how many stars were, so how popular were different AI frameworks, right? Right? And this is a real use case. I wanted to know this, and I coded 0 of this, right? You can argue it's more complex, less complex. It's not a single shot. I have to say, no, like, now I want to do this other thing, or now I want to visualize them on top, or now side by side. So it's a bit more complex, and if I had to do this, I would not do it, right? I would not lose the time to try it out. Thanks to this, I was maybe 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, and then I was like, okay, I get the information I want. And I can clearly see this in 6 months and 1 year happening with my input. Like, hey, I want you to plot me the library, the AI libraries by popularity, and just get the plots. Because now there's something called generative UI, where it generates the UI also, right? So it generates the plots themselves after completing the task, sometimes without the server. So it's not going to be suddenly we are out of jobs, but it's going to be increasingly easy to make what you do every day. At least for me, it's much easier now than it was a year before. Any other question? Okay, thank you.